Jack Fourier states that over time, Australian identity has been constructed to be either exclusive or inclusive. Our identity has been built on colonialism and vast heroic stories that celebrate just a small portion of our nation. But as cinema has progressed, filmmakers have shied away from what Hollywood expects, rejecting a romantic national narrative and instead suggesting that our identity can lie in everyday domestic spaces. If traditional Australian national cinema asks us to admire the outback, masculinity, suffering, and celebrating rugged heroes, The Castle, directed by Rob Sitch, politely replies with,
"Tell him he's dreaming."
Yeah. From the very beginning, the film shifts Australian identity to a more familiar view. The raspy, bogan voice of Darryl Kerrigan transports us into suburban Australia. His love for his family introduces us to the dynamic of the characters and untold complexities of their lives. Rather than heroic individualism, we see routine, familiarity, and family. Simply a dad that sits at the kitchen table discussing power bills. The domestic setting present in The Castle is a stark contrast to sweeping landscapes seen in classic Australian films like Priscilla Queen of the Desert and Crocodile Dundee. But in using this environment, Sitch empowers the working class society. The Kerrigan home is modest and slightly worn. It's weatherboard, filled with mismatched furniture, patterned wallpaper and cluttered surfaces. Perfect reflection of a lived-in home. The personal touches and detail of design establish a unique sense of identity. The recurring dining table conversations are at the centre of this narrative. The Kerrigans often sit around a cramped dining table sharing simple meals and discussing their days. The static, eye-level framing and tight compositions assist in creating this intimate family moment, and an emphasis on the ordinary. Accompanied by their collection of condiments and dated decor, modesty is reinforced. There is no attempt to force typical aesthetic beauty within setting, but instead the film leans into authenticity. This reflects a national identity from a true Aussie perspective. This also comments on a note that national identity encompasses a mass public culture, ignoring definition from Hollywood, in which films typically emphasise wide panoramic shots of the outback and a more mythologized, export-friendly image of Australia, relying on landscape as a defining feature of national identity. But instead, The Castle constructs dignity and emotional richness out of life, positioning relatable stories as worthy of cinematic attention. The film also embraces a domestic idea of man, where Darryl is presented as a different kind of Australian hero. He's not a rugged explorer or colonial figure, but he's a suburban battler who takes on corporate and legal systems. There's no guns, no survivalist struggles, just persistence, community, and an unshakable belief in fairness. With this, Sitch presents an idea of masculinity that is distinctly unglamorous, but feels far more recognisable. Jonathan Rayner describes that Australianness and masculinity has often been built on the blunt, loud and hedonistic. But Darryl defies these constraints, with his drive coming from his love for his family and his home, saving the memories and simple life he has so proudly built. Sitch's reworking of heroism also ties into Rose Lucas's analysis in Dragging It Out, Tales of Masculinity in Australian Cinema. Lucas argues that Australian cinema has historically constructed masculinity through endurance, physical dominance, and isolation traits embodied by figures like Mick Dundee. However, she also notes that there has been a gradual shift towards a more diverse perspective of masculinity in Australian film. Darryl Kerrigan's enthusiastic tour of his home embodies this shift. He proudly celebrates everyday domestic details and expresses open affection for his family. In this moment, masculinity is not tied to stoicism or control, but it's tied to emotional transparency. Darryl is neither physically imposing nor emotionally reserved. Instead, he is openly affectionate, proudly sentimental, and deeply invested in his family. His masculinity is defined not by conquest, but by care. Whether he's praising his wife's cooking or displaying his son's achievements, Darryl represents a softer, more inclusive version of Australian manhood. Masculinity and mateship is unapologetically working class, unfashionable and entirely unpretentious in this film. It reflects a grounded and accessible version of Australian life that challenges dominant cultural hierarchies. In the end, The Castle rewrites Australian national cinema as something that can be loved by us. It's created for suburban families and the simplicity of Australian identity. It stays away from the typical components of a Hollywood perspective and celebrates our iconic bogan culture.